Introduction. Jamie stood, pacing around her room anxiously. By now, she felt like somebody had grabbed a hold of her abdomen and twisted her guts around. She felt sick, afraid, and weak. She had been crying so hard for several hours now that her eyelids were swollen and sore. It seemed like none of this mattered to Eric, who was on the other end of the phone, as distant as ever, as cold as outer space itself. All Jamie wanted was for Eric to like and want her, the same way that she had always loved him and wanted him. It was truthfully starting to feel like that was not going to happen, and as the fear took a hold of Jamie, she started to ask Eric some dreadfully pressing questions. She wanted to know for real if this was all just a game, and if she had been emotionally played with. Had he really just not truly wanted her at all this entire time? Do you see yourself being with me? Creating a life with me? Getting married? She hesitantly asked, as a nervous smile appeared across her face, as she hoped he'd say yes. He said nothing. Utter silence cut through the tiny bit of hope she had maintained so far, and tears began to burn their way down her cheeks again. She heard a slight sigh come from his end. She could tell he was getting annoyed, but she continued. I want to be with you. You know that I want to spend my life with you. Tell me what it is that I'm doing wrong. Please tell me. Talk to me, Jamie pleaded, now biting her nails in anxiousness. He hadn't really said much in the 2 hours that she had been talking to him, trying to persuade him to know that deep down inside, she wanted more from him, and that he didn't have to run away or push her aside. He had given her a couple of excuses along the way, about how he wasn't ready for intense commitment yet, how he had issues that he still needed to resolve before he even considers commitment. But none of them comforted nor satisfied Jamie. She had doubted him for a while now, and wasn't sure whether or not he was going to stay. Something inside her was screaming that she was simply lying to herself all along, and he didn't truly want to be with her. But she so desperately needed him to stay. She needed him to not abandon her. She needed him to comfort her, love her, desire her, understand her, and more importantly, accept her. In the last hour, though, this phone call has felt as though she was speaking to a completely different person. Who was this man? He was cold, and most of his responses had consisted of, or, I don't know. She just wanted the comfort of knowing that he would be there, and that he would stay, and that he wasn't going to leave her. Plus, she felt guilty for even asking him these pressing questions in the first place. Now she thought, if she hadn't started this conversation, they might still be talking about his work and how his parents were going on a vacation soon. But then she also felt that it had to be done, because she had this crushing and ugly feeling deep inside of her for months now. She felt that he too, like all the other guys before, would run away from her. That he too would abandon her and leave her because she saw very clear proof of this in his recent behaviors and actions. It seemed like the more she did for him, the more she was there for him, and the more she comforted him, the more distant and cruel he grew. He started to criticize everything she did, and it seemed like nothing was ever good enough. He had begun ignoring her phone calls and was giving excuses as to why they couldn't talk. He stopped meeting her in real life and even blew off their dinner date, which they had been planning for months, even though they had already prepaid for it. Jamie couldn't help but feel desperate as the truth started to dig its way up to the surface. Snapping out of her thoughts, she realized she had been quiet as she was lost in her own mental world for some time now, and realized that he hadn't said anything either in the past few minutes. She pulled the phone away from her ear and looked at the screen. The call had ended 7 minutes ago. He had hung up on her, and she was so consumed by this whole scenario that she hadn't even heard the click. An intense amount of desperation flooded her body now, as she realized that she had just lost him. She began to grind her teeth as she quickly punched in the numbers to call him back. A girl picked up, and Jamie's heart dropped to her stomach, and her body went cold. Fortunately, it was a wrong number, but the looming thought that he had already moved on and possibly had cheated on her devastated her even more. She tried again. It was the right number this time, but his phone was switched off. She couldn't rest now. She got up and paced around, rethinking about everywhere she could have possibly gone wrong. Then she was reminded of her massive failures from all of her broken relationships in the past. She cried harder, remembering how the last guy had actually moved all of his things out while she was at work. She came home to find him gone. No note, no text, no phone call, nothing. He didn't even want to tell her that he was leaving, and just abandoned her cold turkey. The next day, she got an email from him saying that he accidentally took some of her things, and that they were in a box at her friend's house. No apology, no sorry. Just another line telling her to never contact him again, to leave him entirely alone, and that they were through. It was starting to feel like that all over again with Eric as well. His phone was switched off, he had been distant, and he didn't want to give her any direct answers. Was he going to just dump her too? Was he going to run away like all the others had? Was she really that undesirable? See, while Jamie was going through what we might call an intense emotional breakdown, at the exact same time her best friend, Adrian, was at work, and she had just gotten a text message from her boyfriend, and he was again telling her just how amazing she was, and how much he loved her, and how he felt blessed and lucky to have a woman like her. Now, Adrian was the kind of girl who wasn't exactly a model, and she certainly didn't have the most pleasant personality. But she always had a way of getting what she wanted, especially from guys. Adrian's current boyfriend was so in tune to Adrian's needs that they barely fought. He often went above and beyond to make sure she was happy. She never had to worry about being misunderstood or feeling like he simply didn't get her. Jamie, Adrian's best friend, often thought that Adrian was just lucky and had some sort of superpower, because her relationships always used to work out so well. After all, the two were very similar in many ways. They had the same kind of job, they had similar hobbies and talents, and they had even grown up in the same city. But the weird thing was that Jamie couldn't quite explain or put her finger on exactly what Adrian was doing differently. The reality was that all of Adrian's relationships seemed to follow this pattern of perfection. Adrian knew how to sustain all of her relationships, almost effortlessly and flawlessly, to the point where the guy would literally worship her, and would never, ever think about leaving her. In fact, in every relationship that had ended, it was always Adrian who broke it off. Truthfully, she had a really hard time trying to get the guy to leave or agree to break up. Most of the men she was with always wanted to stay, and would even beg and plead with her to stay. Jamie couldn't quite explain it, but she knew that Adrian was doing something different. However, she just couldn't figure out exactly what it was that Adrian knew that she didn't about men. You might have gotten the hint already, but there was actually a method to what Adrian was doing. There was no happy accident or magical fate that caused Adrian to be so successful in her relationships. Adrian understood something that Jamie didn't. She understood the dynamics of the male psychology and knew exactly how to talk, act, and behave around a man to stack the odds in her favor. This audiobook will equip you with the exact tools, tricks, and strategies which will help you stack the odds in your favor as well, regardless of your current situation. However, just like everything else in life, you can't get results without action. The techniques described in this course work really well, provided you apply them to your life. This course isn't written for mental stimulation or entertainment purposes, It is designed to help you get the precise results you desire from men and relationships with the least amount of effort. Therefore, the only way to see a sustainable change in your life, make sure you act on everything you learn within this course. Alright, now that we're done with our little pep talk, let's get into the first section,